They found him collapsed in the widow's barn at daybreak, pale as a ghost and shaking with fever. Mercy Davis had walked into the murky stable with a lantern in hand, expecting to feed her mare, only to discover this stranger sprawled near a fresh mound of hay. He was clutching his chest, his clothes in tatters, blood staining his dusty sleeves. Something about his eyes, sunken yet blazing with hidden resolve, made her heart lurch. Life on Mercy's ranch had been lonely since her husband died, but nothing prepared her for a dawn encounter with a dying drifter who would change her fate forever. Mercy Davis was no stranger to adversity. The year was 1888, and the harsh wind rolling off the Colorado plains had stripped all illusions of easy living. Her ranch, located a day's ride from the rapidly growing frontier town of Trinidad, had once thrived under her late husband's stewardship. People still whispered that Mercy didn't have the grit to run it alone. They expected her to sell off the land pack-up and fade into obscurity. But Mercy was as resilient as the tumbleweeds that survived every storm. When her husband Jeremiah passed away from a sudden illness, Mercy had stayed put, determined to honor his dream to shape their homestead into something lasting. Each morning, she rose before sunrise, hauling buckets of water to the corral and checking fence lines. She prayed for help, for guidance, and sometimes for company. Little did she know that company was about to appear unbidden in her barn. The barn's sturdy doors groaned under Mercy's strong grip. Dawn usually brought a sense of calm, a chance to check on the horses and make sure no coyotes had gotten into the chicken coop. But that morning, an unsettling hush replaced her routine solace. A low moan emanated from the shadows behind the hay bales. As she raised the lantern, Mercy felt her pulse quicken. Her eyes fell on a man lying face down in the straw, his clothes torn, boots coated in dust, and a streak of dried blood on his temple. He looked like he'd been dragged through cacti. Her first instinct was to bolt and fetch the rifle hanging on her porch, but the man was clearly in no condition to harm her. He barely clung to consciousness. Kneeling beside him, she pressed her hand to his forehead. A searing fever raged beneath cold, clammy skin. Summoning strength from an unexpected well of compassion, Mercy nudged the stranger. His eyelids fluttered, but no words came. She remembered the rag at her waist, used for wiping horse sweat, and gently pressed it to his temple. His lips parted, yet all that escaped was a raspy breath. She wondered how he had ended up here. The ranch was a good few miles from the main road, so he must have made a desperate detour. Was he an outlaw on the run? An unlucky traveler ambushed by bandits. Despite the swirling questions, the situation was urgent. If she didn't tend to his wound, the man might not see another sunrise. Heaving him onto a piece of canvas used for hauling feed, Mercy gritted her teeth and dragged him to the ranch house. By the time she hauled him up the front steps, her back ached and sweat stung her eyes. Inside the modest ranch house, Mercy cleared the kitchen table, shoving aside bowls and the leftover bread from last night. She hefted the stranger's limp body onto the wooden surface, the lantern casting flickering shadows across his drawn features. She grabbed her stash of home remedies, some medicinal whiskey, clean rags, and a tin of salve she'd learned to make from her grandmother. Her hands trembled slightly. She'd never treated bullet wounds beyond helping Jeremiah with minor scrapes. To her horror, she discovered a bullet hole near the man's ribs crusted with dried blood. Whatever luck had guided him to her barn, it was nearly spent. Her mind raced. She needed help, but the town doctor was 12 miles away. The single horse she kept was strong, but not fast enough to get there and back without risking the man's life. She had to do what she could, alone. With each breath, the drifter's chest rattled ominously. Mercy pulled out the bullet with careful determination, biting her lip to stifle her own panic. The man spasmed once, groaning in pain, and then fell silent. She pressed whiskey-soaked rags into the wound, praying she'd staunch the bleeding. All the while she whispered soothing words, as much to calm herself as to comfort him. "You're going to be all right, stranger. God brought you here for a reason," she murmured, her voice echoing in the stillness. Mercy cleaned and bandaged the wound, her fingers slick with blood. Finally she stood back, heart pounding, and watched the flicker of hope returning to his breaths. The bullet was out, but infection could kill him as surely as lead. She wrung out a cloth and placed it on his fevered brow, offering up a silent prayer for God's healing hand to guide her. Daylight filled the small windows of the ranch house, chasing away the shadows that had haunted Mercy's vigil through the night. The man stirred, and Mercy hurried to his side. His eyes flickered open, revealing irises of a stormy blue, like a troubled sky over the plains. He tried to speak, but the words came out as a hoarse grunt. She offered him a sip of water, lifting his head gently. He coughed, then managed a single word. "Thanks." Mercy watched him cautiously. Was he a danger? He didn't look like a typical outlaw. No brand-new Colt single-action army revolver by his side. No black hat. But the bullet in his ribs wasn't self-inflicted. Someone had tried to kill him. The drifter tried to move, but Mercy pressed her palm to his shoulder. "Stay still," she said softly. "You're hurt real bad. You're safe here, but you gotta rest." She recognized the question in his eyes before he voiced it. Why, he rasped. "Why are you helping me?" Mercy's gaze shifted to the crucifix on the wall, just a small wooden cross her husband had once fashioned from leftover fence boards. "Because it's right," she replied simply. "And I've lost too many people already." For a brief moment, the drifter's eyes softened. Then, as though the weight of his predicament pressed in, he sank back onto the table. His entire demeanor radiated exhaustion. While he drifted between consciousness and fever dreams, Mercy did her best to keep him comfortable. She changed his bandages regularly, coaxed broth into his parched lips, and wiped away the sweat that poured off him in waves. At times he moaned about someone named Earl, muttering incoherent fragments about a betrayal. Mercy listened carefully, uncertain what new dangers might lurk beyond her ranch gates. On the third day, the drifter's fever began to break. Mercy took the opportunity to do something else she'd been avoiding riding out to her nearest neighbor. Old Thomas Walker was a retired army medic who'd settled on a small plot of land about 2 miles away. Although he spent his days caring for goats and living a solitary life, she hoped he still remembered enough field medicine to help her patient. Mounting her bay mare, Lucy, Mercy rode hard along a winding trail hemmed in by scrub brush. She found Thomas by his goat pen, wearing a sweat-stained hat and looking startled to see her. After listening to her rushed explanation, he gathered his crude medical kit, mostly bandages and homemade poultices, and accompanied her back to the ranch. During that ride, Mercy revealed little about the stranger, uncertain how much she should trust even a kind old neighbor. When they arrived, Thomas bent over the injured man with expert scrutiny. He gently peeled back the bandages, nodding appreciatively at Mercy's earlier work. "You did well," he said. "Infection's not as bad as it could be." The drifter, though still weak, opened his eyes. Thomas introduced himself, and the patient managed a nod. Over a cup of tepid coffee, Mercy explained how she'd found him. Thomas's lips tightened in concern. A bullet wound like that, plus the bruises on his arms. Someone wanted him dead. That was the conclusion Mercy dreaded. She quietly asked Thomas if it was safe for the stranger to remain at her ranch. Thomas shrugged. No telling who's after him, but moving him now could kill him. Mercy gazed at the man. He was a stranger, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that their fates were now intertwined, like two branches on the same wind-bent tree. For the next week, Mercy and Thomas worked in shifts. One would tend to the ranch chores, feeding chickens, repairing fences, collecting eggs, while the other stayed by the drifter's side. Every evening, Mercy prayed for guidance, torn between caution and compassion. Slowly, the stranger regained strength. He could sit up for short periods, though each movement drew a wince. At times, he'd stare at Mercy with an intensity that unnerved her, yet she never felt threatened. It was as though he were trying to unravel the mysteries of her kindness. Finally, one evening, as Mercy offered him a bowl of stew, he found his voice. "My name's Elijah," he said, softly. He paused, his gaze wandering to the simple cross on the wall. Elijah Carter. Mercy smiled, relieved to have a name. "I'm Mercy Davis, and this here is my home." For better or worse. Elijah pressed a hand to his bandaged side, grimacing. "I owe you my life," he said. His voice was still raspy, but at least it held more strength. Mercy stirred the stew. "I won't argue with that," she joked gently. "But you'd do the same for me, wouldn't you?" Elijah's eyes darkened, a ghost of regret crossing his features. "I reckon I would," he managed. He tried to shift on the makeshift bed, a thin layer of quilts over the table. Mercy quickly slid a pillow under his head. She'd grown used to his silent company, the hush occasionally broken by his stifled groans or whispered thanks. But now that he could speak, 1,000 questions clamored in her mind. Who shot him? Why was he wandering so close to her ranch? Would trouble follow him here? For the moment, she kept her curiosity at bay. He needed rest. Late that night, after Thomas had gone home, Mercy found herself unable to sleep. She sat by the fireplace, remembering her husband, Jeremiah's final days. The ranch had been the dream they'd built together, and losing him had almost shattered her. But the land needed tending, and Mercy possessed a quiet determination that kept the place alive. Stirring the dying embers, she heard Elijah stirring on the kitchen table. Though she'd offered him her husband's old bed, he insisted on staying near the warmth of the fire. She turned to see him watching her through half-lidded eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Didn't mean to rouse you." "You didn't," Mercy assured him, drifting over with a cup of water. "Couldn't sleep." Elijah mustered a faint grin. "Me neither. My mind's full." They sat in companionable silence, the crackle of the fire knitting two solitary souls in the hush of the Colorado night. By the next morning, Elijah had improved enough to sit by the window. Mercy helped him to a rickety chair, setting a blanket over his lap. Outside the ranch, spread before them in a panorama of scrubby fields, the chicken coop and the horse corral. A crisp breeze carried the scent of pine from the distant foothills. Elijah gazed over the land. "You manage this all by yourself?" he asked, respect evident in his tone. "Mostly," Mercy replied, leaning against the window frame. "Neighbors help from time to time, but it's my responsibility now, ever since Jeremiah." She let the words trail off, but he caught the heartbreak in her voice. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She inclined her head in acknowledgement. "Thank you. It hasn't been easy. But the ranch is everything I have left of him. I won't let it go." Elijah nodded, an unspoken understanding passing between them. After a pause, Mercy asked, "And you?" "Elijah." "Where were you headed before you ended up half dead in my barn?" He swallowed, choosing his words carefully. "I was on my way to Trinidad to meet someone." His hesitant tone piqued her curiosity, but she sensed his reluctance. Mercy decided not to push too hard yet. Instead, she handed him a bowl of fresh oatmeal. "Eat," she instructed with a gentle smile. "Gotta keep your strength up if you plan to do much of anything." As he ate, she busied herself around the house. In the corner, a few of Jeremiah's possessions still sat untouched, a battered trunk, a pair of boots. She felt Elijah's gaze follow her, noting every detail. She wondered if his secrets would eventually become her burden. But for now, the house felt less empty, despite the unspoken questions that simmered like coals beneath the surface of politeness. Days passed, and the ranch fell into a new routine. Elijah, determined not to be a burden, insisted on helping with small chores once he could move without excruciating pain. At first, Mercy insisted he rest, but she soon realized that his willingness to pitch in was a blessing and a testament to his gratitude. He brushed the horses with gentle hands, mended the chicken coop's loose boards, and even chopped a bit of firewood, though Mercy had to stop him when she saw the strain in his face. More than once she'd catch him wincing, gripping his side, and she'd rush over to steady him. "It'll take time," she told him, guiding him to a stool. "That bullet tore you up pretty good." He'd nod, swallowing his pride, which Mercy found oddly endearing. She was starting to see more than just a wounded stranger. She glimpsed a man with a battered soul. One crisp afternoon, Mercy saddled Lucy for a trip to town. She needed supplies, flour, salt, kerosene for the lamps, and wanted to check if there was any talk of trouble in the area. She suggested Elijah stay behind to rest, but he insisted on accompanying her. "I'm strong enough to ride," he said, steel in his voice. "And I owe you a debt." They departed under a bright sky, the sun warming their backs. As they rode toward Trinidad, the sprawling plains gave way to a cluster of buildings, rickety storefronts, and the occasional wagon. The sign at the edge of town read, "Welcome to Trinidad." A real frontier settlement, once bustling with coal miners and ranchers alike, some of them using the famous Santa Fe Trail for trade and travel. Mercy felt Elijah's tension as they passed watchful townsfolk. She wondered if he feared being recognized, or if he feared someone he'd recognize first. They hitched their horses outside the general store, a modest establishment called McAllister's Provisions. Inside the shelves were stocked with flour sacks, tin goods, dried beans, and a few luxuries like coffee and sugar. The shopkeeper, a round man with a thick moustache, greeted Mercy cordially. She was a familiar face, one of the few women managing a ranch alone. As Mercy listed her needed items, Elijah lingered near the firearms display. A well-worn poster on the wall showcased the iconic Colt single-action Army revolver, a real piece of frontier history. Elijah's gaze seemed drawn to it, and his shoulders tensed. Was he recalling the bullet that nearly ended his life? Mercy noticed a shadow cross his features. She returned to his side with her purchases. "Everything all right?" she asked quietly. He exhaled, forcing a half-smile. "Just memories." He didn't elaborate, and Mercy decided not to pry, at least not yet. Outside, they loaded supplies onto their horses. Mercy planned to swing by the local post office to pick up her mail and see if any messages awaited her. The post office doubled as the telegraph station with a small sign reading Western Union above the door. As she entered, Elijah lingered by the horses, scanning the street. She watched him from inside, noticing how his posture stiffened whenever a stranger walked by. Something in his demeanor spoke of watchfulness, a man expecting trouble. The clerk at the post office was a thin woman named Edna, who greeted Mercy with a smile. "Good day, Mrs. Davis. Got a letter from St. Louis for you." Mercy's heart skipped, remembering how her sister had moved to St. Louis. She thanked Edna, took the letter, and decided to read it later in privacy. Exiting the office, she noticed Elijah's jaw clench as a tall man in dusty attire walked by, eyeing them both. Mercy felt tension prickle the air, and she wondered if Elijah had recognized him, or feared that he might be recognized first. They rode back to the ranch without incident, but the unease lingered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mercy found Elijah standing near the corral, staring at the blazing sky. She joined him quietly. Finally he spoke. "There was a man in town. I thought he might be one of Earl's gang." Earl, Mercy echoed, remembering the name he'd muttered in feverish delirium. Elijah nodded, lips pressed tight. "Earl Jeffries. Used to run with him, at least that's what I thought." He let out a bitter laugh. "Turns out he was just using me." Mercy laid a gentle hand on his arm. "You don't have to tell me, Elijah. Not if it's painful." He shook his head. "You deserve the truth. I ran with a group of men who made money by less than honest means. Earl was the leader. But when I wanted out, he decided I was expendable." A hush settled over them, broken only by the rustling of the horses. Mercy's mind whirled with questions. She'd taken in a man with a criminal past. Yet here he stood, clearly remorseful, haunted by betrayal. "So Earl put a bullet in your side because you wanted out?" Elijah gazed at the fiery horizon. "He tried. Didn't expect me to survive, let alone stumble onto your land." His voice fell to a whisper. "I never wanted to be an outlaw. It started with small cons, a bit of hustling, but then it got darker, hold-ups, violence. And He faltered, swallowing hard. "I realized it wasn't worth losing my soul." Mercy turned toward him. The wind caught a stray lock of her hair. "Elijah, people can change. I believe you want a better life." He stared at her, awe flickering in his eyes. "Why are you so sure?" She shrugged lightly. "Because you've proven it every day since you woke up in my kitchen." The sky darkened, stars emerging one by one. Standing close, they felt an inexplicable bond forged in vulnerability and trust. Eventually, Mercy cleared her throat, drawing away slightly. "We best head inside. The night gets cold and you're still healing." Elijah nodded, but a thoughtful expression lingered. "Mercy," he asked, stepping closer. "I can't stay here forever. If Earl's men are searching for me, they might come here." A tremor of fear slid down her spine, yet Mercy lifted her chin. "Then we'll face that when it comes. For now, you're still not well enough to travel, and I refuse to turn you out like a stray." He managed a grateful half-smile. "Thank you." As they walked inside, a single shooting star streaked across the sky overhead unnoticed. But that omen of change was there, heralding the transformation of two battered lives into something neither had dared hope for. Over the next several days, their fragile peace remained intact, and Elijah's strength steadily returned. He helped Mercy repair a broken fence in the south pasture, checking the posts for rot and driving nails with measured force. Though he tired quickly, every swing of the hammer rang with determination. Mercy found herself smiling more often, an unfamiliar warmth blossoming in her chest. She admired his dedication. his careful approach to tasks, the way he'd tentatively place a hand on her shoulder to steady himself, yet always with respect in his touch. One evening, as they shared a simple supper of cornbread and beans, Mercy finally opened the letter from St. Louis. Her sister Clara wrote about the struggle of city life, offering Mercy a place to stay if the ranch became too much. Mercy folded the letter slowly, her lips firming. She had no intention of leaving her home, especially now. After supper, Mercy found herself confiding in Elijah. "Clara thinks I should sell the ranch and move to St. Louis. She worries about me being alone." Elijah looked around the cozy interior, the flickering lamplight dancing on the rough-hewn walls. "But you're not alone," he said softly, then hesitated, as though realizing the weight of his words. "I mean, with neighbors nearby and all." Mercy studied his face, noticing the color rising to his cheeks. He cleared his throat. "This place holds memories, right? I can see you've built your life here. It'd be a shame to lose it." She nodded, her eyes drifting to Jeremiah's trunk in the corner. "I won't give it up. Jeremiah poured everything into these acres, and I promised to keep it going." Elijah's expression grew tender. "I reckon I understand that kind of devotion." The next morning, Mercy awoke to find a note pinned to her door. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "Went to check the west fence line. Be back soon. E." Concerned Mercy saddled Lucy and rode out toward the west pasture, a desolate stretch where shrubs grew sparse and the land sloped into dry ravines. She found Elijah leaning against a fence post, hat shielding his face from the sun. His breathing was labored, and he clutched his side, sweat trickling down his brow. She dismounted quickly. "What in God's name are you doing out here alone?" Elijah forced a strained laugh. "Just trying to be useful. The fence here was near collapse." Shaking her head, Mercy offered him a canteen of water. "You're pushing too hard." He exhaled a pained breath, but his eyes were resolute. "This ranch gave me a second chance. Least I can do is repay the favor." Mercy helped Elijah fix the fence, though she insisted he rest, frequently worried he'd tear the stitches Thomas had applied. As they worked, a sense of unspoken camaraderie washed over them. Each nail hammered felt like another anchor, tying him to a new life, a new possibility. At one point, Mercy raised her gaze to the endless expanse of the sky, remembering how lonely this land had felt without Jeremiah by her side. Now Elijah's presence, though complicated by danger, filled a void she never thought anyone else could. They finished the repairs as the sun reached its zenith, then sought shade beneath a lone cottonwood. While they shared a brief lunch hardtack and water, Elijah finally opened up. "I used to be a farmhand," he said quietly. "Before the war. Before everything. My parents died young, leaving me with nothing. So I drifted, did what I had to in order to survive." Mercy squeezed his hand gently. "You'll find your way back to honest work," she said, with soft conviction. The days merged into weeks, and the swirling rumors in town never quite reached Mercy's ears. She suspected that if Earl's gang was looking for Elijah, they were being discreet about it. Perhaps Earl believed Elijah truly dead. Still, a seed of worry grew in Mercy's heart. She doubled her vigilance, keeping the ranch's rifle loaded and storing extra shells near the door. Elijah, too, stayed alert. Every barking coyote or distant hoofbeat set him on edge. During calmer moments, they shared stories of the past. Elijah spoke of traveling through Dodge City, working odd jobs at stables and saloons before falling in with Earl. Mercy reminisced about her first years with Jeremiah how they'd saved every cent to buy this land. One evening, Elijah stood at the corral fence, watching the last streaks of twilight fade. Mercy joined him, and for a quiet eternity they just breathed in the silence side by side. That night, Mercy dreamed of silhouettes moving across the ranch shadows with guns drawn. She woke in a cold sweat, certain that something was wrong. Creeping to the window, she peered out at the moonlit yard. Everything looked still. The only motion was the barn's weather vane, creaking in the breeze. She tried to shake off the nightmare, but a persistent unease clung to her. Slipping outside, she found Elijah sitting on the porch, fully dressed. He looked up at her, solemn. "You feel it too?" he asked quietly. Mercy nodded, her heart pounding. The night was eerily silent, a hush that made the hair on her arms stand. No insects chirped, no owls hooted, just an expectant stillness, as though the land held its breath. They spent the rest of the night on guard rifles, close at hand, neither admitting aloud that they expected trouble. The following morning, Thomas arrived unexpectedly, driving a small wagon full of feed he'd bartered in town. Mercy welcomed the distraction, though she couldn't shake her lingering anxiety. Over cups of strong coffee, Thomas mentioned hearing rumors of a gang passing through the outskirts of Trinidad, a group led by a man rumored to be a ruthless enforcer. Mercy exchanged a tense glance with Elijah. Thomas continued. "They've been making inquiries about a fellow with a bullet wound. Townfolk are spooked. The sheriff's got no leads." Elijah's grip tightened on his coffee mug. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "That's Earl," he muttered. Thomas looked between them with a worried frown. Mercy filled him in briefly, explaining Elijah's past and the danger they might face. Thomas set down his mug. "Well, you won't face it alone. I may be old, but I've still got my aim." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Mercy secured the livestock, making sure the barn doors were sturdy. Elijah and Thomas tested the rifles, ensuring they were in working order. By evening, Mercy lit extra lanterns around the porch and corral, hoping the added light would deter any skulking intruders. As dusk approached, a gust of wind carried the distant rumble of thunder. A storm brewed on the horizon, painting the sky a bruised purple. Inside, Mercy paced, her nerves taut. "Maybe we should warn the neighbors," she suggested. Thomas shook his head. "Too spread out. And with night falling, it'd take too long. Best we stay put." Elijah leaned against the kitchen wall, arms folded across his chest. "They might come tonight. Earl never was one for patience." Mercy met his gaze. "Then let's be ready." Thomas's voice trembled, but his resolve was firm. "We'll stand together." The storm broke with a flash of lightning, followed by a roar of thunder that rattled the windows. Rain lashed the roof in sheets. The three of them positioned themselves in the ranch house lanterns, extinguished, to avoid making themselves easy targets. The only light came from sporadic lightning bursts, illuminating the yard in ghostly flashes. Hours dragged on. Each roll of thunder could have masked the sound of approaching horses. Each lightning flash might reveal armed figures creeping closer. Tension coiled tight in Mercy's chest. Suddenly, between thunderclaps, the unmistakable crunch of hooves on gravel pierced the night. Mercy inhaled sharply. Elijah raised his rifle face, pale but determined. Thomas crouched by a window, peering through a gap in the shutters. Lightning split the sky again, revealing several silhouettes on horseback. A voice called out over the storm. "Elijah Carter, come on out, and we'll spare the woman." Mercy's heart hammered in her ears. Elijah clenched his jaw, inching toward the door. She seized his arm. "You're not going out there alone." Thomas hissed from the window. "At least 3 riders. They're packing rifles. Maybe a shotgun. Could be more. Rain pounded relentlessly. Another voice shouted, "Elijah, don't be a fool. Earl's giving you one last chance. Come out, and you can walk away." Elijah's eyes flashed in the darkness. "I know Earl better than that. He won't let me live." Outside, lightning illuminated the figure of a tall man on horseback, water streaming off his coat. He lifted a rifle toward the house. "Time's up, Carter." Before Mercy could stop him, Elijah stepped onto the porch, rifle leveled. "I won't let you hurt anyone here, Earl." His voice shook with fury. "You want me? Come get me." A bolt of lightning split the sky, revealing the standoff in stark white. Thunder boomed, shaking the porch. Earl Jeffries appeared from behind the tall rider, flanked by two more armed men. His hat brim dripped with rain, and a sneer twisted his thin lips. "Well, look at that," Earl drawled. "The scrawny farmhand's still alive." He glanced around, noticing Mercy and Thomas by the door, rifles raised. "You got yourself some friends now. Carter." Elijah's knuckles whitened on his rifle. "I left your gang, Earl. I'm done with you." Earl feigned a mocking sigh. "You were always too soft. Couldn't handle a bit of killin' or two." He spurred his horse closer. "Hand over Carter, lady, and I'll spare your ranch." Mercy stepped forward, drenched by the rain, her voice resolute. "You step foot on my land again, I'll plant you in it." Earl's laugh was lost in another clap of thunder. "You'll regret that, widow." The confrontation erupted in a flurry of gunfire. A flash of lightning illuminated the scene as Elijah fired first, forcing Earl's men to duck behind their horses. Thomas took aim at another rider, the crack of his rifle nearly drowned by thunder. Mercy's heart raced, but she stood her ground, returning fire whenever a muzzle flashed in the dark. Rain poured down, turning the yard to mud and hindering visibility. Once she glimpsed Earl's furious face, drenched and distorted in the strobing light. A bullet whizzed past her, splintering a porch post. Another tore through Thomas's sleeve, drawing a sharp curse. Elijah scrambled behind a water barrel, pressing a hand to his side. Blood darkened his shirt, a torn stitch or a fresh wound. Mercy's stomach lurched, but her focus remained on keeping the invaders at bay. Amid the chaos, a single thought fueled her. She would not lose her home or Elijah tonight. Between thunderclaps, Mercy heard a piercing whinny. One of Earl's men had ridden around the side of the house, trying to flank them. She ducked inside, darted through the kitchen, and took up position at a back window. Through the sheets of rain, she saw a figure dismount, creeping toward the back door. Her hands shook, but she steadied the rifle. When lightning flickered, she spotted his silhouette. She fired the recoil, jolting her shoulder. The man dropped with a yelp, his weapon clattering to the ground. Breathing hard, Mercy rushed back to the front. Thomas knelt by a prone figure. One of Earl's men had managed to climb the porch before being stopped. Elijah was hunched over near the barrel, his teeth clenched against pain. Outside, fewer shots were fired now. Earl bellowed a furious command, but the storm drowned out his words. Then, amidst the downpour, the pounding of retreating hooves signaled that at least some of Earl's gang had fled. Wind-driven rain hissed across the yard as Mercy carefully approached Elijah. His left arm was slick with blood, and the bandage around his ribs had been soaked and torn by the fight. She dropped to her knees beside him, ignoring the muddy puddles. "Elijah, can you stand?" she asked, voice trembling. He groaned, trying to rise. Thomas rushed over, supporting Elijah on one side, while Mercy took the other. Together they half-carried him into the house, where the roof offered some respite from the deluge. Outside, Earl's men had scattered at least for the moment. The yard was littered with spent shell casings and a wounded horse belonging to one of Earl's accomplices. The ranch house shutters had bullet holes. But Mercy's immediate concern was Elijah. She tore open his shirt, revealing the reopened wound at his side. Crimson stained her hands as she pressed a cloth to the gash. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered fiercely. Thomas crouched beside them, rummaging through his medical kit with shaking hands. The storm raged on lightning, casting eerie flashes over Elijah's pallid face. Quickly, Thomas disinfected and re-stitched the wound, his jaw clenched in concentration. Elijah's breath hitched as the needle pierced his flesh. He remained conscious, but barely. Mercy whispered soothing words, cradling his head in her lap. She was drenched hair, plastered to her skin, but she hardly noticed. At last, Thomas tied off the stitches. "He'll pull through, but he's lost blood. We need to keep him warm and hope fever doesn't set in." Mercy helped Elijah to a makeshift bed near the fireplace, piling blankets around him. She stroked his damp hair, tears welling despite her resolve. Outside, the storm began to ebb, the thunder rolling away in the distance. Yet the threat of Earl's return loomed like an unspoken vow in the darkness. Morning arrived with a pale dawn light. The rain had washed the land clean, leaving behind glistening mud and pools of water reflecting the cloudy sky. Mercy stepped onto the porch rifle, still in hand. She surveyed the aftermath. The yard bore hoof prints, spent shells and the prone forms of two men who hadn't escaped. One lay wounded, groaning in the mud. The other was eerily still. Thomas joined her, his face grim. "We should see to that wounded fella." Mercy nodded, though her stomach churned. Together they approached the injured man, who glared at them with pain-racked eyes. "You, help me," he croaked. Exchanging a look, they carefully moved him to the barn. Thomas bandaged his leg wound, and Mercy fetched water. In a trembling voice, the man confessed he'd been hired by Earl only days ago, not realizing the job involved murder. "I just wanted money for my family," he sobbed. Mercy closed her eyes. The West was full of desperate souls. Inside the ranch house, Elijah lay fitfully, fever threatening to claim him again. Mercy touched his forehead, wincing at the heat radiating from his skin. Thomas checked the stitches, sighing with exhaustion. "We need to keep him hydrated. I'll ride into town and fetch the doctor. This is beyond my skill." Mercy gave a resolute nod, though her heart twisted with fear. She pressed a cool compress to Elijah's brow, brushing back his matted hair. "Hang on," she whispered. "We've come too far for you to give up now." Thomas saddled up, casting a worried glance at Mercy. "Lock up and keep watch. Earl could return." She swallowed hard, shouldering the responsibility. "Thank you, Thomas, for everything." As he rode away, she felt more alone than ever, alone with a wounded man she'd come to care for more deeply than she could express. But Mercy wasn't ready to surrender hope. All day, Elijah drifted between delirium and brief moments of awareness. Mercy coaxed water into his parched mouth and murmured calming words each time he groaned. She recalled how she'd found him in the barn, nearly dead, and how she'd prayed for a miracle. Now she prayed again, tears slipping down her cheeks. Late in the afternoon, the sound of approaching hooves startled her. Rifle in hand, she went to the door, heart pounding. Relief washed over her as she saw Thomas returning with the town doctor, a gruff man named Doctor. Anders known for his skill in bullet extractions. Dr. Anders wasted no time examining Elijah's wound and checking for infection. "You did good work," he told Thomas. "But fever's set in. I'll do what I can." Hours passed in agonizing slowness as the doctor cleansed and restitched administered laudanum and mixed a bitter herbal concoction to reduce fever. Mercy hovered, praying silently. Night fell again, silent and still. No storms. No gunfire. Doctor. Anders left Elijah resting in a proper bed, satisfied that he'd done all he could. "If he lives through the night, he'll likely recover," the doctor said softly. "But his strength is at its limit. Keep him warm, keep him hydrated, and keep watch." Thomas, exhausted, settled in a chair by the fireplace. Mercy sat at Elijah's bedside, clasping his hand. He stared at her through half-open eyes, the fever's glow making his cheeks burn. "Thank you," he whispered. She pressed her free hand to his brow, tears stinging her eyes. "Don't talk," she murmured. "Just rest." His voice was a rasp. If I don't make it." "Stop," she pleaded, her breath catching. "You will. You must." Elijah managed the faintest smile, eyes fluttering shut. Mercy's heart pounded her soul, clinging to hope. She refused to accept any other outcome. Morning arrived with golden sunlight that pushed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes swirling in the air. Mercy jolted awake, her head resting on the side of the bed. She immediately pressed her hand to Elijah's forehead. It felt cooler. A cautious smile tugged at her lips. He stirred, blinking as if coming out of a long darkness. "Mercy," he croaked, voice weak but lucid. She nodded, tears of relief gathering. "I'm here." Thomas awoke at the fireplace, stretching stiff joints. He saw Mercy's expression and sighed with gratitude. "Looks like the fever broke." A bird chirped outside, as if celebrating. The ranch felt unusually calm, as though the tumultuous winds had finally passed. Elijah slowly lifted his hand, placing it over Mercy's. No words were needed. Her eyes glistened with silent relief. Outside, the day seemed brighter. Hope was no longer a distant dream, but a living, breathing presence. In the days that followed, Elijah recuperated steadily, and news filtered in from Trinidad that Earl Jeffries had vanished south, possibly heading toward New Mexico. Word of the failed assault on Mercy's ranch had spread, and no one in town was eager to shelter Earl's gang. Thomas stayed for a while, helping Mercy patch up bullet holes and repair the porch. The wounded outlaw they'd captured recovered enough to walk, and with Mercy's reluctant agreement, Thomas escorted him to the county sheriff. Mercy hoped the man would find some redemption, but that was the sheriff's domain now. As life slipped back toward normalcy, Mercy and Elijah found themselves standing by the corral one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues. He still moved carefully, nursing his side, but a quiet joy danced in his eyes. "Thank you," he said softly, "for giving me a reason to stay alive." Mercy leaned on the fence, heart fluttering. She thought of Jeremiah, how she'd once believed she'd never feel affection like that again. But life had a way of surprising her, twisting paths in unexpected ways. Elijah was a testament to second chances for both of them. She studied his profile, the slant of his jaw, the gentle lines etched from hardship. "You don't have to thank me," she replied. "You earned your keep, and you saved my ranch." He shook his head slowly. "I'm not sure I deserve happiness, not after all I've done. But I want to be better. I want to. He paused, uncertainty flickering across his features. I want to stay, if you'll have me. Her chest tightened with emotion. Though the memory of Jeremiah would always remain, she felt a stirring she hadn't known in years. A promise of new beginnings, forging hope out of sorrow. A gentle breeze whispered through the corral, rustling the horses' manes. The day's chores were done, but the weight of Elijah's question lingered in the air. Mercy let her hand rest lightly on top of his. Elijah, you've risked your life to protect what's mine. You've bled for this ranch, and your presence has filled a void I thought could never be filled. She met his gaze, voice trembling. I'd like you to stay. His eyes lit with gratitude, relief, and something deeper. A small smile curved his lips as he quietly repeated, "Thank you." They fell into a companionable silence, each absorbing the magnitude of what lay ahead. Life would never be simple. Earl might still haunt their thoughts, and the West was rife with dangers. But that night, under the Colorado sky, Mercy Davis and Elijah Carter found in each other the promise of a life worth fighting for. Weeks rolled into months, and the ranch flourished under the combined efforts of Mercy and Elijah. With Thomas's help, they expanded the cultivated fields, planted more crops, and even repaired sections of the barn that had been neglected. Word spread around Trinidad that Mercy's ranch was no longer just a struggling widow's homestead, but a place where honest work and compassion reigned. Occasionally, rumors surfaced of Earl Jeffries stirring up trouble in neighboring territories, but no threat returned to Mercy's doorstep. Each day, Elijah devoted himself to the land, pushing away the shadows of his past. And each evening, he and Mercy shared quiet moments that whispered of deeper feelings growing between them. One autumn day, as they finished harvesting a modest wheat crop, Elijah paused, brushing sweat from his brow. He gazed at Mercy with a soft intensity that made her heart flutter, and she smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. It was near dusk when Elijah took Mercy's hand, guiding her to a small knoll overlooking the fields. Autumn's colors burned across the horizon, and a soft wind carried the scent of hay. There, standing among the tall grasses, he turned to her with a solemn expression. "You've given me a life I never thought possible," he began. "I was a drifter with no home, no future. You saved me." Her throat tightened, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. She remembered the day she found him half dead in her barn. How unimaginable that it would lead to this. He swallowed, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a simple silver ring. It wasn't new or ornate, just a small token he'd somehow obtained. "I know this might be too soon," he said, voice trembling. "But Mercy, would you let me stand by your side as your partner, for as long as we both live?" Mercy's breath caught tears glimmering on her cheeks. She clasped his hand, the ring held between them. The memory of Jeremiah was still there, not overshadowed, but guiding her to this moment of courage. "Elijah Yes," she whispered, her voice laden with joy and the promise of tomorrow. He slipped the ring onto her finger, hands trembling as relief and happiness flooded him. They embraced beneath the fading light, the wind gently rustling around them like a hushed chorus of approval. When they returned to the ranch house, Thomas, who had become a steady presence, was waiting by the porch. He took one look at their shining faces and grinned. "Took you too long enough," he remarked dryly, then pulled them into a gruff hug. In that moment, Mercy felt the fullness of life swell in her chest, as if the very land rejoiced in their commitment. The next few days buzzed with quiet excitement. Though they planned no grand ceremony, Mercy wanted to exchange vows in a simple service by the ranch. Thomas offered to stand as a witness, and even Dr. Anders promised to make the trip provided there were no urgent calls in town. A neighbor's wife volunteered to bake a modest cake, and word spread. Despite the short notice, folks from Trinidad trickled out to the ranch on the appointed day, curious and supportive of the widow and her reformed drifter. The sun shone bright in a cloudless sky. Mercy wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself, while Elijah donned a clean shirt and trousers. The ring he'd given her gleamed softly in the sunlight. Under an old cottonwood tree, they pledged their love and devotion, forging a union built on faith, redemption, and the unwavering resilience that had carried them both through tragedy and danger. After the vows, the small gathering celebrated with food, music, and laughter. Old Thomas produced a fiddle, startling everyone with a lively tune that got folks dancing on the makeshift dance floor of packed dirt. Children ran around chasing chickens and giggling at the horses nibbling scraps of fruit. Mercy felt a warm glow watching Elijah converse with the townspeople men, who once would have eyed him with suspicion, but now seemed to respect the honest work he'd done and the humility in his eyes. Dr. Anders clapped Elijah on the back, likely reminding him of how close he'd come to death. At one point, Mercy and Elijah slipped away from the crowd. Standing by the fence line, they looked over the land they now shared, hearts brimming with gratitude. She took his hand, smiling at him, and in that moment, she knew Jeremiah would approve. This was the future she'd prayed for. In the days that followed, life continued with a newfound joy. Winter approached, bringing chill winds. But the ranch was well stocked, and both Mercy and Elijah worked tirelessly to ensure everything was prepared. Cattle were sheltered, horses had ample feed, and the larder was filled with preserves and staples. Nights found them in front of the fireplace, Elijah reading from the old Bible. Jeremiah had once cherished, Mercy sewing or knitting by lantern light. Sometimes they'd speak of the future, perhaps expanding the ranch or raising a family, if God blessed them so. Other times they spoke of the past, healing old wounds with each shared memory. And so the ranch, once a solitary outpost of grief, transformed into a haven of renewal. The dying drifter found in the barn had not only survived, he'd helped Mercy Davis find more love and hope than she ever dreamed possible. From a lonely widow nursing a dying stranger in her barn, to a fierce stand against ruthless outlaws, and finally to a tender vow beneath a cottonwood tree. This tale proves that the most unexpected encounters can shape our destiny. Mercy Davis chose compassion over fear, and in doing so, she found a second chance at love. Elijah Carter, once a hunted drifter, discovered a home he could defend and cherish. Their triumph over danger and despair reminds us that redemption is always within reach, and that miracles can appear in the most unassuming places. Before you go, if you've been captivated by Mercy and Elijah's journey full of drama twists and the enduring power of love, be sure to hit that like button. Share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more riveting stories. Together we'll keep the spirit of the Wild West alive, one tale at a time. Thank you for watching.